If one day you were sent to be a mail-order bride not for love, but to humiliate a stranger in the middle of a windy and snowy Wild West, what would you do? That is the story of Claire Beaumont, a New York City girl turned into a pawn in a cruel bet. It is said that she was sent to the wilds of Wyoming to prove that a city girl cannot survive in the harsh land. But they did not expect this place of exile was where she found true freedom. And the man she was sent to humiliate Adam Cole. A gruff, withdrawn cowboy was the only one tolerant enough not to let her go. Amidst the snowy days, two seemingly strangers began to learn how to live, how to love, and how to forgive. Their story is not a fairy tale. It is the journey of rebirth of two people who were once hurt, finding kindness in the harsh frontier of the 19th century. If you ever believed that people can find light in the darkness, then this is the story for you. Like, share, and subscribe to the channel to join me in the land of frontier hearts, where love does not come easily, but always comes at the right time. The chandeliers at the Beaumont ballroom were still burning when the silence began to spread. It wasn't the kind of silence that followed prayer or awe. It was the brittle kind, thin as glass, the kind that broke with a whisper. Claire Beaumont stood beneath the crystal lights, her gloved hands trembling just slightly, her eyes fixed on the ivory envelope lying open on the marble floor. Around her, the polite murmurs of Fifth Avenue society turned sharp-edged, slicing through her like wind through lace. Nathan Pierce had left. No scene, no apology, just a messenger with a note short, final, cowardly. The engagement was off. I remember the way she didn't cry. Not then. Her face was so still, it frightened me. Someone laughed too loudly near the punch table. Someone else whispered, "Poor girl." The orchestra pretended to tune their violins, their notes trembling with pity. And at the top of the staircase, Evelyn Beaumont, the woman who could command a room with a look, stared down at her daughter as though she'd found a stain on the family silver. "Pick it up," Evelyn said softly, her voice smoother than the pearls at her throat. "At least show some dignity." Claire bent, gathered the envelope, and straightened. The lights above her glittered like ice. "He's made his choice, Mother." Evelyn's hand twitched around her fan. "You made his choice for him. You embarrassed him with that display of sentiment last week. A Beaumont does not chase affection. Claire, affection?" The word felt foreign in that room of chandeliers and whispers. Claire's throat tightened, but she said nothing. Outside, the winter wind was clawing at the windows. Somewhere in the distance, a carriage bell rang. That afternoon, Claire found her mother at the writing desk, the golden pen scratching furiously across thick parchment. "You will sign this," Evelyn said, without looking up. "What is it?" "A contract." The pen stopped, the ink pooling slightly at the edge of the page. "A placement? A marriage arrangement?" Claire frowned. "You mean an agency." Evelyn's gaze lifted, her blue eyes as bright and cold as cut glass. "There are men out west, farmers, widowers who write for wives. A mail-order bride. They call it crude, but fitting. You wanted a life of your own. You'll have it." It took a moment for the words to sink in. "You're sending me away. I'm sending you to learn humility, to learn how the world treats those without a Beaumont name to shield them." Claire stared at her mother's hand guiding the pen, the steady, cruel elegance of it. "You're doing this to punish me." Evelyn didn't deny it. "Consider it redemption for you, and for this family." That afternoon, Claire found her mother at the writing desk, the golden pen scratching furiously across thick parchment. You will sign this, Evelyn said, without looking up. What is it? A contract. The pen stopped, the ink pooling slightly at the edge of the page. A placement. A marriage arrangement. Claire frowned. You mean an agency? Evelyn's gaze lifted, her blue eyes as bright and cold as cut glass. There are men out west, farmers, widowers who write for wives. A mail-order bride. They call it. Crude, but fitting. You wanted a life of your own. You'll have it. It took a moment for the words to sink in. You're sending me away. I'm sending you to learn humility, to learn how the world treats those without a Beaumont name to shield them. Claire stared at her mother's hand guiding the pen, the steady, cruel elegance of it. You're doing this to punish me? Evelyn didn't deny it. Consider it redemption for you, and for this family. Ah! That night, the letter from the agency arrived. A name, a place, Mr. Adam Cole, Wyoming Territory, former soldier, ranch owner, reliable, sober, widowed. Evelyn slid the paper across the desk. He'll take you sight unseen. You'll leave within the week. Claire held the page in her hands. The ink smelled faintly of tobacco and dust. She imagined the vastness of the West, nothing like Fifth Avenue, no ballroom, no gossip, just wind and dirt and silence. Maybe, she thought, silence could be kind. She took up the pen, her signature small but steady. Better a stranger's wife, she murmured, than your prisoner. Her mother looked up sharply. What did you say? Nothing, Claire said. Only that I'll go. The next few days passed like a dream, half forgotten. The servants packed trunks. Evelyn gave instructions about dowries and train schedules. Claire wandered through the house, the rooms where she had learned to waltz, to curtsy, to smile at men who never saw her truly. In her father's old study, she found the music box he once gave her, a small brass thing with a chipped porcelain rose. When she wound it, the melody trembled, off-key but sweet. She placed it in her coat pocket, a sound to remind her she had once been loved. Thus, on the morning of her departure, New York was wrapped in mist. The streets gleamed with last night's rain. Horses clopped slowly past gas lamps dimmed by fog. The harbor smelled of coal and salt and something like endings. Claire stood on the pier, her gloved hand clutching her ticket. Her breath made small clouds in the cold air. Behind her, Evelyn's carriage waited lacquered black, spotless. The woman inside did not step out. Only the coachman opened the door, handed Claire a small purse, and said, "From your mother." Claire took it without looking. Tell her the roses are dying." The man blinked, uncertain if he should respond. She didn't wait for him to. The steamboat let out a long, low cry that seemed to come from the bottom of the world. The plank trembled beneath her feet as she boarded. From the upper deck, she looked back. The city rose like a cathedral of smoke and stone, towers piercing the fog. Fifth Avenue was somewhere beneath that veil, her old life sealed behind glass and silence. She thought of Nathan Pierce, of his smooth words and weaker heart. She thought of her mother, still arranging flowers in that cold house, and she thought, for the first time, not of what she'd lost, but of what might lie ahead. The boat's whistle sounded again. The ropes fell as the ship drifted into the gray. Claire removed one glove, pressed her fingers against the railing, and let the chill of the metal ground her. If anyone had seen her then, they might have said she looked fragile. But I remember differently. I remember a woman whose heart was breaking quietly and who, somehow, chose to keep walking. The mist closed behind her. The city disappeared. And New York, in all its brightness and cruelty, sank into the fog like a fading dream. Snow had been falling since before dawn. There were marks on the floor where boots had once paced for hours during sleepless nights. He set a pot of coffee on the stove, then sat at the table with a folded letter in front of him. He'd read it enough times to know the words by heart. Yet he opened it again. Miss Claire Beaumont, age 24, educated, quiet, of good family, wishes to relocate west for a new beginning. The handwriting was tidy, not hers, some clerk from the matchmaking agency back east. Still, he traced the letters as though he could find something hidden in the curves, a hint of her voice, her heartbeat, a mail-order bride. The very phrase sounded strange on his tongue. He hadn't wanted one. He told the agent as much, the first time they wrote him about it. "I'm not looking for company," he'd said. "I'm looking for someone who can handle winters." The man in Cheyenne laughed and replied, "They're the same thing out here. Mr. Cole." Maybe he was right. Loneliness could freeze a man quicker than any snow. He stared at the paper again. 24, educated, quiet. That last word stuck with him. Quiet could mean timid, or it could mean steady. He hoped for steady. Outside, the wind changed direction. The sound of it sliding down from the ridge filled the room like a sigh. He rose, walked to the window, and looked out over the valley. His ranch wasn't much 3 corrals, a half-dozen horses, a shed, a stretch of land that turned gold in summer and white for half the year. But it was honest. Every board, every scar on his hands, he'd earned. He picked up his gloves and went back out. The roof of the east stable sagged under snow. He climbed up with a hammer and a handful of nails, working slow, deliberate, the way he'd learned to do everything since the war. The rhythm steadied him. When his left hand began to tremble, he pressed it to his thigh until it stopped. The wind carried the smell of pine and distant smoke from another homestead miles away. He paused, listening to nothing but the creak of trees and the slow breathing of the valley. Sometimes I think the silence here is the only thing that kept him alive. There are men who need noise to remember they exist. Adam was the opposite. The quiet reminded him he was still here, that the world hadn't ended with the war, even if parts of him had. By late afternoon, the clouds had thinned enough for a pale sun to break through. The snow glittered like glass dust. He finished patching the roof, climbed down, and leaned against the fence. Scout pressed against his leg, tail swishing gently. Ember pawed at the frozen ground. "Couple more days," Adam said softly. "Maybe less if the train runs on time." The idea of a woman stepping off that train, his wife, by letter and law, was almost absurd. He couldn't picture her. He tried, but every image came out wrong. Too fine for this place, too fragile for the wind. He told himself he didn't care whether she stayed a week or a lifetime, but that wasn't true. The house felt different lately, tidier, almost expectant. He'd scrubbed the floors, repaired the loose hinge on the door, even set a second plate on the table, though no one sat across from him yet. At dusk, he went inside. The kettle whistled softly. He poured a cup of coffee and sat again at the table, the letter before him like a quiet promise. He thought of the last woman who'd lived here, Martha. The fever took her 3 winters ago. He hadn't spoken her name aloud since, but tonight he did. "Wish you could see this. Martha," he said. Snow's deep. Roof's fixed. Scout's getting old. I don't know what I'm doing. The words hung there, small and bare. The fire cracked once in the stove. He folded the letter, slipped it back into its envelope, and placed it beside a small wooden box, a keepsake carved from pine, smooth from years of handling. Inside were a few trinkets, a silver button from his uniform, a locket, a dried flower she once tucked into his hatband before he left for war. He closed the lid. Night came quickly in the mountains. The cold pressed against the windows, whispering. He lit a single lamp, its glow catching the edges of his profile high cheekbones, a faint scar above his jaw, the lines of a man who had worked more than he'd spoken. He looked at the empty chair across from him. Miss Beaumont, he said quietly, trying the name aloud. Claire. It sounded strange, elegant, out of place in the rough timber walls. He wondered what she'd think of this house, of the valley, of him. Maybe she wouldn't stay. Most didn't. Not really. The West asked for more than people were willing to give. He took a deep breath, feeling the ache in his shoulder. Let's see if she stays, he murmured. Scout raised his head at the sound of his voice, then laid it back down on his paws. Adam finished his coffee and blew out the lamp. The dark filled the room like water, soft and deep. Outside, the snow kept falling quiet, endless, faithful. Somewhere far to the east, a ship was crossing the Atlantic coast, carrying a woman who no longer belonged to Fifth Avenue. He didn't know it yet, but the wind that moved over those gray waves would reach this valley in a matter of days. And when it did, it would bring the scent of something unfamiliar rose and salt, sorrow and courage, a reminder that even in the coldest country, something still tried to bloom. By the time the eastbound train reached Silver Creek, the storm had already swallowed the valley whole. Snow came sideways, thick and relentless, scraping against the windows like sand. The station lamps glowed in a small circle of yellow, trembling in the wind, while the rest of the world dissolved into white. Claire Beaumont stepped down onto the platform, her boots sinking immediately into the slush. The wind tore at the hem of her skirt, flinging icy needles against her face. The air smelled of coal smoke and frozen iron. For a moment, she stood still, her gloved hand gripping the small valise that held everything she owned. The porter shouted something behind her, a word lost to the storm. Then the train whistle screamed a long, aching sound that made her chest tighten. When the cars began to move again, she felt a flicker of panic. The city was gone. New York. Her mother. Even the shame of that ballroom. It was all being carried away down the tracks, swallowed by the dark. The wind howled through the gaps in the platform boards. She blinked against the snow. Somewhere, a door opened. He was standing at the far end of the platform. Adam Cole had been waiting since noon. He'd tied Ember to a post by the freight office and stood with his hat low, coat collar turned up, hands deep in his pockets. When the train finally groaned to a stop, he searched each window, half expecting her not to come at all. But there she was, small, pale against the storm, with a look that was neither fear nor courage, but something between the two. For a moment, neither of them moved. The wind filled the space where introduction should have been. Then he stepped forward, boots crunching in the snow. Miss Beaumont. Her eyes lifted. They were gray, not blue as he'd imagined, but soft, clear, watchful. Mr. Cole. He nodded once. The brim of his hat dripped with melting snow. Let me take your bag. Thank you. Her voice was steady but faint, as though it came from a place far away. He reached for the valise, their gloves brushing for an instant. The contact startled them both. She was colder than he'd expected. He wondered how long she'd been sitting in that unheated car. "This way," he said, turning toward the wagon. She followed, stepping carefully over the icy planks. The snow came faster now, blurring the outlines of buildings, softening the world into shapes of white and gray. By the time they reached the wagon, both were dusted in frost like figures carved from sugar. He lifted her up by the elbow, hesitant, almost formal, then climbed beside her, taking the reins. The horses started slow, hooves muffled under the deep snow. The wheels creaked behind them. The train whistled once more, then faded into the valley. For a long stretch, neither spoke. The world outside the wagon was only wind and white, the sky pressing low against the mountains. Adam kept his eyes on the road, or what little of it he could see. "Was the trip long?" "It felt long," she said quietly. "I lost track of the days." He nodded. "Most do. It's different out here." She looked sideways at him. Different how he hesitated. The quiet, the space. It can make you feel small. Her lips curved faintly, not quite a smile. "I'm already small. Mr. Cole." He almost smiled back, but didn't. I remember that silence between them. It wasn't empty. It was searching. Two people, strangers by law and by heart, measuring the distance between what they were and what they might need to become. The wind eased for a moment, revealing a pale moon behind the clouds. Claire pulled her coat closer. "Do you ever get used to it?" she asked. "To what?" "The cold." "Not really," he said. "You just learn how to work around it." She nodded, thoughtful. "I suppose that's true for most things." He glanced at her then, surprised by the weight of that answer. The light from the lantern swung across her face fine features, a faint tremor in her jaw from the cold. Not fragile, exactly. Just human in a way he hadn't been near for a long time. He looked away before she could see him watching. They rode on. Snow hissed against the sides of the wagon. The horses strained uphill. Claire tried to imagine the place waiting for her. The ranch, the valley, this man's life. She had pictured a stranger, rough and wordless. Yet his silence wasn't cruel. It felt cautious, like a man guarding something fragile. She cleared her throat softly. "I don't know if they told you much about me. They said your name," he answered, "and that you could read." She let out a small laugh, almost surprised by the sound of it. "That's a start." He looked at her again, one eyebrow raised. "I wasn't expecting laughter in a snowstorm." "Neither was I," she admitted. Another pause, the kind that felt less awkward now. He shifted the reins. "You come from a city, don't you?" "Yes, New York." He nodded. "Never been." "Don't," she said softly. "It's beautiful, but it doesn't forgive." The way she said it made him glance at her again. There was a story behind those words, but he didn't ask. Out here, a person's past was their own until they chose otherwise. The snow deepened as the wagon turned off the main road. The valley opened ahead, wide and silver under the rising moon. Somewhere below, through the blur of snow, a faint light flickered. The ranch. "There," he said quietly, pointing. "Cole Ranch." She followed his gaze. Through the storm, the house looked small but solid, the windows glowing with firelight. A thin ribbon of smoke rose from the chimney. Her throat tightened. After all the miles, all the fear, that single light felt like a promise she hadn't dared hope for. When the wagon stopped at the gate, Adam jumped down and walked around to her side. He offered his hand. She hesitated, then took it. His palm was rough, warm despite the cold. The snow swirled between them. "Welcome home," he said softly. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then she nodded once, almost shyly. "Thank you, Miss Cole." He looked at her, at the thin, damp veil clinging to her hair, at the quiet strength in her eyes, and something in him shifted, just slightly, like the first crack of spring beneath frozen earth. I think that was the moment the valley began to thaw. Not outside the snow kept falling, but inside, where the long winter had been waiting to end. The wind rose again, sweeping over the mountains, carrying their breath away, and under the storm's low song, the door of the house opened to the glow of firelight. The door closed behind them with a soft thud, sealing out the wind. The sound of it lingered in the air, almost like relief. Claire stood in the small front room of the ranch house, her hands still trembling from the cold. The fire in the stone hearth was bright and steady, painting the walls in gold and amber. Smoke from the pine logs curled toward the ceiling, carrying the sharp, sweet scent of sap. She turned slowly, taking in the space that would now be her home. The ceiling was low, the walls bare but clean. A wooden table stood near the fire, with 2 chairs, one worn smooth, the other newer, as though built recently. There were shelves lined with jars, a kettle, a stack of folded cloths. Everything was plain, built by hand, built to last. Adam set her small trunk beside the stairs. "It isn't much," he said, voice quiet, almost apologetic. "It's warm," she answered. That was all that mattered. He nodded once. "Your room's upstairs. You can rest if you like." "Long trip." She hesitated. "Thank you." He started toward the door, then paused, his hat still in his hand. "There's a note on the table," he said, "if you need anything." When he left, the silence settled again, thick as the falling snow outside. Claire walked to the table and found a folded scrap of paper under a small cup. His handwriting was careful, awkward in its neatness. "Take your time." That was all it said. She read the words twice. They felt like more than kindness. They felt like permission. Upstairs. Her room was simple, a bed, a quilt, a single window that looked out toward the valley. Through it, she could see the snow moving like a tide over the fields, the mountains standing silent beyond. For the first time in weeks, she exhaled fully. I remember thinking how quiet that house must have sounded, how every sound would belong to them alone. The crackle of the fire, the wind at the chimney, 2 people breathing under the same roof, but not yet belonging to each other. That night, she couldn't sleep. The walls creaked with the cold, and the clock downstairs ticked steadily through the hours. She lay awake listening, wondering what he was thinking. What sort of man built a life in a place where the nearest neighbor was a mile of snow away? When morning came, she rose before dawn. The stove in the kitchen was cold. She found kindling, matches, a bag of flour, and a tin of beans. She had watched servants cook all her life, but watching and doing were worlds apart. By the time the sun began to rise, the room was filled with smoke. The bread was black on one side, raw on the other. She coughed, waving a towel uselessly. The door opened behind her. Adam stood there, hair damp from washing, eyes half amused, half concerned. Smoke signal. She froze, mortified. "I was trying to make breakfast. I can see that." He walked over, lifted the skillet from the stove, and set it aside. The smell of burnt dough hung in the air. "You didn't open the flue." The Waddy pointed to the small lever near the stovepipe. "Lets the smoke out." "Oh." She laughed softly, embarrassed. That would explain the fog. He smiled, not fully, just the hint of one. No harm done. The last time I tried to cook biscuits, the dog wouldn't even eat them. I'll do better next time. You will. He turned to the kettle, poured water into 2 tin cups, and set them on the table. The steam rose between them like a truce. Outside, the light was growing stronger, a cold blue against the window glass. After breakfast, if burnt bread and black coffee could be called that, he took her out to the yard. The snow was waist-deep in places, glittering under the pale sun. He carried an axe, the handle worn smooth from years of use. "You ever split wood?" he asked. She shook her head. "I doubt I've even held an axe." "Then today's as good a day as any." He showed her how to stand, how to balance her weight, how to bring the blade down clean through the log. The first few swings went wild. She laughed each time she missed, a sound that startled even her. When she finally split one clean, she looked up to find him watching. His eyes had softened, still guarded, but lit with something almost gentle. "You learn quick," he said. "Necessity is a fine teacher." He nodded. "Out here, it's the only one." They worked until noon, stacking the wood beside the barn. Scout wandered around them, sniffing the snow, his fur dusted white. Ember watched from the corral, tail flicking in slow rhythm. By the time they went back inside, Claire's arms ached, her cheeks flushed with color. Adam stoked the fire while she washed her hands in a basin by the door. "You'll sleep well tonight," he said. "I think I might," she answered, smiling. The house smelled of wood smoke and bread again, this time from the loaf he had baked the night before. He sliced it carefully, poured a little honey over each piece, and placed one before her. They ate without much talk, but the silence was no longer heavy. It felt shared. The fire crackled. Outside, the snow began again, soft and steady. After the plates were cleared, Adam set a small lamp on the table. "You read much?" he asked. "I used to," she said. "Mostly poetry. My father liked it." He nodded toward a small shelf by the window. "There's a Bible and a few old papers. Not much, but you're welcome to them." "Thank you." He sat back, the lamplight catching the lines of his face. "Takes a while to get used to the quiet," he said. "I don't mind it," she replied. "It feels honest." He looked at her for a moment longer, as though trying to read something behind her calm. Then he nodded. "That's good." Later, when she went upstairs, she paused at the landing and looked down. He was still sitting by the fire, his head bowed slightly, one hand rubbing the scar on his knuckles. The dog lay curled at his feet. In that stillness, she felt something shift inside her, small but real. The city had stripped her of everything familiar, but here, in this quiet house, she could almost believe she might begin again. I think that's how healing begins, not with grand gestures or confessions, but with a cup of black coffee, a shared silence, and the faint surprise of laughter in the smoke. Downstairs, Adam stirred the fire one last time before turning in. The logs crackled, sparks rising like faint stars. He looked toward the stairs, where the floorboards creaked once beneath her step, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel entirely alone. The snow came hard that morning, the kind that fell straight and fast, blinding in its certainty. The sky was the color of pewter. Wind rattled the shutters, pushed against the doors, like a living thing trying to get in. Adam had been up since dawn, feeding the horses, checking the fences. The drifts were waist-high near the barn, and the roof creaked under their weight. Claire followed him out, despite his protest. "You don't have to," he'd said, pulling on his gloves. "I want to," she'd answered. "If I'm to live here, I should work here." And she did quietly, steadily, her cheeks red from the cold. Together they shoveled the snow from the path, hauled water for the animals, laid new straw in the stalls. Scout trotted at their heels, tail low but wagging. By noon, her breath came shorter. Adam noticed the way her shoulders sagged, but she smiled when he asked if she was tired. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice trembled. It was nearly dark by the time they came back inside. The fire had burned low, and her fingers shook as she tried to light the lamp. He took the match from her gently. "Rest," he said. "I'll take care of it." She nodded, but her eyes were unfocused, her skin pale beneath the flush. "I've seen how illness comes on the plains. It arrives quietly, like dusk, until you realize the light's gone, and you don't remember when it started to fade. By nightfall, the fever had her. She lay on the narrow bed upstairs, her hair damp against the pillow, breath shallow. The lamp burned low on the nightstand, throwing soft shadows across the wall. Adam sat beside her, one hand resting on the quilt, not touching her, not daring to. "Claire," he said once, but she didn't answer. He fetched water from the basin, dipped a cloth, and laid it on her forehead. The heat beneath his fingers startled him. She stirred, mumbling words that made no sense. Then, more clearly, Mama Adam froze. Her hand, small and shaking, reached blindly toward the space beside her. Without thinking, he took it. "It's all right," he said quietly. "You're all right now." The wind howled outside. The house creaked. He could hear the horses shifting in the barn, the soft padding of Scout's feet downstairs. Hours passed that way. He changed the cloth again and again, brewed water with a pinch of herbs Martha once kept in a jar. He remembered the way she'd done the same for him when he came back from the war, fevered and broken. He hadn't prayed in years, but that night he did awkwardly, under his breath. "Don't take her," he said to the dark. "Not this one." He didn't know why he said it, only that the thought of her slipping away into silence felt unbearable. She moved again, her voice faint, lost somewhere between sleep and dream. "Better a stranger's wife." The words faded. Adam looked down at her, at the lines of exhaustion around her eyes, the way her hand gripped his even in fever. She was fighting for her life without even knowing it. He sat back, rubbing his temples. His own body ached, but he wouldn't leave. Not for a minute. Outside, the wind died a little. The house grew still. He stirred the fire in the small stove at the corner of the room. When he turned back, she was crying softly in her sleep. He wiped the tears with the back of his rough hand, careful not to wake her. The night stretched long and shapeless. Time lost meaning. He dozed once, head bowed beside the bed, and woke when she murmured again. "Mama." "No," he said softly. "It's me." Her fingers tightened around his. For the first time, she seemed to breathe easier. The lamp burned low, the flame flickering like a heartbeat. I remember that night as though it were the first warmth after a long winter. Not because love was declared, it wasn't, but because compassion found its way into the silence. And that's rarer than any promise. When the first pale light of dawn reached through the window, the fever broke. Her breathing deepened. Her face turned toward the sun. Adam sat watching, the weight of sleeplessness heavy on his shoulders. His shirt was damp from the heat of the fire and the sweat of worry. He leaned back, letting out a long breath he hadn't known he was holding. Downstairs. The kettle began to hiss. The smell of wood smoke and steam filled the room. Claire stirred, her eyes opening slightly. For a moment she didn't seem to know where she was. Then she saw him slumped beside the bed, hair unkempt, hands still clasped in hers. Her voice was hoarse. "You stayed." He looked up, startled. "Of course." She blinked, a weak smile touching her lips. "You didn't have to." "Maybe not," he said. "But I did." She closed her eyes again, her hand still resting in his. The morning light caught the corner of her face, softening everything, the fatigue, the fever, even the faint scar at her temple. Adam watched her breathe for a long while, until exhaustion finally took him. His head dropped to the edge of the mattress, his hand still linked with hers. When Scout nosed the door open hours later, the house was quiet again. The dog padded across the floor and curled near the bed, tail thumping once before settling. Outside, the snow had stopped. The sky was clean and wide, blue as a new beginning. Inside, the fire burned low, steady and sure, and beside it, two people slept through the first peace they'd known in years. When the fever passed, the world returned slowly, like color seeping back into a faded photograph. The days grew longer, the air softer. The snow began to sink into the ground, leaving behind small streams that glittered under the sun. Claire moved through the house with careful steps, still pale but steadier. The first morning she came downstairs without leaning on the banister. Adam looked up from his coffee and gave a small nod. "You're stronger," he said. She smiled faintly. "I'm alive, thanks to you." He looked away, pretending to check the fire. "You'd have done the same." "Maybe," she said, "if I'd known how." That answer stayed with him all morning. Outside, the land was waking. Thin blades of grass pushed through the thawing earth, and the river broke open with the sound of glass shattering. The horses grew restless, their coats shedding winter's weight. Even Scout seemed younger, bounding after the geese that swept low over the field. Claire began to help again, though Adam insisted she take it slow. She learned to move with the rhythm of the ranch, the work, the quiet, the wind. Every day brought something new, learning how to saddle Ember, how to mend a torn shirt, how to tell when the clouds carried snow or rain. I think that's what healing really looks like, small tasks done with trembling hands. Until one morning you realize the trembling's gone. Ember was patient with her. The first few times Claire tried to mount, the mare shifted, testing her, but Adam stood nearby, steadying the reins. "She won't throw you," he said. "She just wants to know if you trust her." Claire took a breath, pressed her heel, and the mare began to move. The motion was awkward at first, then smoother, the wind brushing her face like a new kind of freedom. When she glanced back, Adam was watching. He didn't smile, but something in his eyes had softened. Later, while she brushed Ember's mane, she said quietly, "I used to paint horses when I was a girl, but they never looked alive. I think it's because I'd never touched one." He leaned on the fence. "You paint, I did," she said. "Back in New York. My mother thought it was a waste of time." He nodded, as if he understood. "Out here, time's all we've got." She looked up at him then, surprised by the gentleness in his tone. "Do you miss the war?" He paused before answering. "No, but I miss the men I knew. You get used to being needed." The words hung there a moment simple, honest, heavy with memory. The wind picked up that afternoon, carrying the scent of rain. By evening, The clouds rolled down from the mountains like smoke. A spring storm was coming. Adam climbed onto the roof to secure the shingles. Claire followed him with a bucket of nails and a hammer, ignoring his protests. "You'll catch cold again," he said. "Then you'll have to save me twice," she answered, handing him the nails. He shook his head, but she caught the ghost of a smile. The wind grew stronger. Rain began to fall first in drops, then in sheets. They worked quickly, hands red from cold, hair plastered to their faces. When a gust tore one of the boards loose, they both reached for it at the same time, their fingers brushing. For a heartbeat, they froze. The rain drummed around them, and the world felt impossibly close. He looked at her, at the strands of wet hair clinging to her cheek, the determination in her eyes. She looked back, and neither moved. Then Scout barked from below, sharp and sudden. The dog jumped against the ladder, tail wagging, as if the storm were a game. Claire startled, pulling her hand back. Adam laughed under his breath, quiet, rough. The sound of something breaking open after too long kept shut. They finished the roof just as the sky began to lighten again. The rain eased into a mist, and a thin strip of gold appeared on the horizon. Inside, they hung their coats by the fire. Claire's hair curled in damp strands around her face. Adam poured 2 cups of coffee, still steaming from the kettle. "Storm's past," he said. "For now," she replied. They sat across from each other at the small wooden table. Scout lay between them, head on his paws, tail thumping once. Adam reached to move the lamp, and his sleeve brushed her wrist. Neither spoke. The air between them seemed to hum softly, alive with unspoken things. She took a sip of her coffee. "Do you ever think the land changes us?" He looked into the fire. "No. I think it shows us who we are when there's nowhere left to hide." She considered that, her gaze tracing the lines of his face, the steadiness, the weariness, the quiet decency that had nothing to do with words. "Then maybe that's a good thing," she said. "Maybe it is." For a long time, they sat without speaking, listening to the fire crackle and the last drops of rain slide down the window. The night outside was still. The valley smelled of wet earth and pine, and the stars began to return, faint but steady. When she rose to go upstairs, she paused by the stairs. "Good night, Adam." He looked up from his chair. "Good night, Claire." Their eyes met, no smile, no gesture, just a shared stillness that said more than words could carry. She went to her room, and he sat a while longer by the fire, Scout asleep beside him. The flames burned low, throwing their shadows against the walls, one small and still, one tall and watchful, both learning, in their own quiet way, what it meant to stay. I think that's how love begins on the frontier, not in declarations, but in the space between chores, in the silence after storms, in the look that lingers, because neither person knows how to end it. Outside, the land breathed again, washed clean by the rain. And inside that little house on the Wyoming plain, something else began to grow slowly, gently, like spring pushing through the thaw. The trail to town wound through fields still wet from spring rains. Wildflowers had begun to bloom along the edges, blue lupine, prairie aster, the color of distant storms. Claire rode Ember at an easy pace, her skirt tucked neatly, the wind pulling loose a strand of hair. It had been months since she last saw Silver Creek. Adam rode beside her, hat low, silent as always. He didn't talk much on the road, never did, but his presence was steady, a quiet shape beside her against the vastness of the plains. They needed supplies: flour, seed, oil for the lamps, fabric for mending. For Claire, the trip meant more than that. It was proof that she belonged here, that she could walk into a store and be seen not as someone's punishment, but as a woman making a life. When they reached town, the air buzzed with sound wagon wheels, horses, voices calling across the street. The smell of dust and coffee and wood smoke hung in the morning light. Claire dismounted and tied Ember to the post outside Mr. Callahan's store. Adam went to the blacksmith's, promising to meet her before noon. Inside, the store was crowded with barrels of flour and fabric bolts, glass jars of candy, and the faint sound of the telegraph ticking from the back room. Claire moved carefully between the aisles, her basket on her arm. She was measuring cloth when the bell over the door jingled. "Claire Beaumont," a voice said behind her. Her hand froze on the fabric. She turned slowly. Nathan Pierce stood by the door, smiling as though time hadn't passed. His coat was fine, his hair slicked back, the same self-assured tilt to his chin she remembered too well. Only his eyes had changed colder, sharper, with that particular cruelty that comes from a man certain he still holds power. "I thought it couldn't be," he said, "but here you are, Mrs. Cole. Is it—" She straightened. "Yes, Mrs. Claire Cole." He laughed softly. "So you finally found your level." The words landed like a slap. People nearby turned their heads. The store seemed to hush, the rustle of paper and fabric fading into silence. Claire felt her throat tighten, but she held his gaze. "I didn't come here for you. Nathan, leave me be." He stepped closer, voice lowering. "Your mother must be proud, trading lace for mud and horses." She wanted to speak, to say something that would cut as deep, but her voice trembled before she could. Then another voice came from the doorway, quiet, steady, dangerous in its calm. "That's enough." Adam stood there, shoulders squared, coat still dusted from the road. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The air shifted with him. Nathan turned, smiling that same practiced smile. "Ah, the husband. I didn't mean offense. Just a bit of conversation between old acquaintances." Adam's eyes didn't waver. "You've had your conversation. Now step aside." For a long second, neither man moved. Then Nathan gave a mock bow, tipping his hat toward Claire. "Good day, Mrs. Cole." He left, the bell ringing faintly as the door closed behind him. Claire's hands were shaking. She set the basket down on the counter, breathing hard. Adam walked to her. "You all right?" She nodded, though her voice came thin. "He used to be. I know who he was." There was something in Adam's tone she hadn't heard before. Not anger exactly, but something colder, older. She wanted to explain, to tell him everything, but the words tangled in her chest. "It doesn't matter any more," she said finally. He didn't answer. He paid for the supplies, his movements careful, precise. The shopkeeper's eyes flicked between them, then down again. By the time they stepped outside, whispers had already begun to move through the street, small ripples in a small town. On the ride back, neither spoke. The wind had turned dry and hot. Claire could hear the saddle leather creak, the faint rhythm of hooves on dirt. Every mile seemed longer than the last. When they reached the ranch, the sun was sinking, turning the valley gold. Adam unsaddled Ember, his face unreadable. "Adam," she said, voice low. "Please don't think he stopped. His back's still to her. I don't think anything. Not yet. That hurt more than anger would have." She stood there a moment, unsure whether to reach for him or leave him be. Finally, she turned toward the house, inside. The lamp burned on the table, throwing a soft light across the room. The place felt smaller than before, the air heavier. She unpacked the supplies, set the flour in the cupboard, folded the fabric. Her hands moved automatically, though her mind replayed every word Nathan had said. "So you finally found your level." She whispered the phrase to herself, tasting its bitterness. "I've learned that ghosts don't always come with chains and wails. Sometimes they wear good coats, clean boots, and the smile of a man who once said he loved you." Outside, she could hear Adam chopping wood. The steady rhythm of it was both comfort and distance. When he came in later, he washed his hands at the basin and sat down without a word. They ate in silence, the fire crackling between them. She tried to meet his eyes, but he kept them on his plate. "Finally," she said softly, "he means nothing to me." Adam looked up then, and she saw the exhaustion in his face, the weariness of a man who's seen too much deceit in the world to know what's true when it stands before him. "I want to believe that," he said. "Then do." He nodded once but didn't answer. Later, when he went to the barn, she stood by the window, watching the last light fade from the hills. The land was quiet again, but not peaceful. Scout lay near the door, ears twitching, as if sensing what she couldn't say. Outside, Adam lifted another log, his shadow long against the barn wall. He didn't look toward the house, and for the first time since she arrived, the warmth between them felt fragile, as if one wrong breath might break it. I think that's how doubt begins, not in the shouting or the storms, but in the silence afterward, when two people stop reaching across the space between them. The night deepened. The mountains disappeared into shadow, and somewhere in that stillness, a rumor began to take shape small as a spark, waiting for wind. The first snow came early that year, thin, restless flakes drifting down through the valley, the kind that didn't stay long, but warned what was coming. Adam was in the barn when the rider arrived. The man handed him an envelope, the paper creased and stained from the road. The return mark read Silver Creek. It was from Nathan Pierce. Adam hesitated before opening it, his thumb rough against the seal. He wasn't sure why he felt dread, only that it rose from somewhere deep, older than jealousy. He read the letter once, then again. The words were neat, careful, polite in their cruelty. "Mr. Cole, I write only to spare you the embarrassment of ignorance. The lady you took into your home, Miss Beaumont, was not sent west by accident or affection. She was, I'm afraid, part of a wager. Her mother wished to prove that refinement could not survive among savages and soil. I was to marry her, but your good fortune delivered her to you first. Consider this my courtesy. Sincerely, Nathan Pierce." The letter trembled in his hand before he realized it was his own fingers shaking. Outside, the sky hung low and gray. Scout barked once, uneasy. Adam folded the letter, placed it on the table, and sat for a long while. He could hear the wind moving through the pines, the horses shifting in their stalls, the faint creak of the rafters. Inside him, something colder than anger began to settle. Claire was upstairs mending a shirt when he came in. She looked up and smiled faintly. "You're back early?" He didn't answer. He stood by the fire, the folded paper still in his hand. Her smile faded. "What is it?" He held the letter out. "You tell me." She took it, read it once, and in that instant, he saw the truth in her face before she spoke a word. Her hand dropped to her side, the letter sliding from her grasp. Adam, please, how much of it is true? Her voice broke. All of it, but not the way he said. He waited. She took a breath. Her eyes shining with tears she refused to shed. My mother arranged it. She wanted to humiliate me. Humiliate you, too. If she could. Nathan was part of it. I didn't know until after I agreed. I thought, maybe it was a way to start over. His jaw tightened. Start over. By lying. I never lied to you. You didn't have to, he said. You just let me believe what I wanted. She stepped toward him, but he turned away. I was ashamed, she whispered. And then I started to care. I thought I could leave it behind. He looked at her then, eyes dark with the kind of hurt that doesn't need to be shouted. You think the truth stays buried in this land out here? The wind digs everything up. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Finally, he said quietly, I need some air. He left the door open behind him. The cold swept in, smelling of pine and snow. Claire stood alone by the fire. The letter lay on the floor between them like something dead. I've seen what guilt does to people. It doesn't burn bright. It just drains the color out of everything you touch. By nightfall, the snow had thickened. She sat at the table, a lamp burning low, and wrote a letter of her own. The words came slowly. Adam, I can't undo what brought me here, but what happened after that was real. If you can't forgive me, I understand. You deserve truth, even if it comes too late. Claire. She folded it, left it beside the hearth, and gathered her shawl. Scout whined, circling her feet, but she only knelt and pressed her hand to his head. Stay with him, she said softly. Then she stepped outside. The wind struck her like a wall. Snow swept across the yard, erasing her footprints as fast as she made them. She walked toward the road, head bent, the dark closing around her. Inside, the fire burned lower. Scout barked once, then again, pacing by the door. Adam returned hours later, snow thick on his coat. The wind had risen, shaking the windows. He shut the door against it and went to hang his hat, but froze when he saw the folded paper on the table. He read her letter in silence. When he reached the end, his breath left him like a man punched in the chest. He dropped the page, turned toward the door, and Scout was already there, pawing at the threshold, whining low. Go, Adam said. Find her. The dog bolted into the storm, his dark shape swallowed by white. Adam grabbed his coat and followed. The wind cut like knives. He called her name, again and again, but the storm swallowed the sound. The snow was deep now, up to his knees, each step a battle. Scout barked somewhere ahead. Adam stumbled toward the sound, heart pounding. Then he saw her half buried by snow, her shawl torn, her hair streaked white with frost. Claire. He dropped to his knees, lifted her into his arms. Her face was pale, her lashes rimmed with ice. Her lips moved faintly. I'm sorry. Don't you dare, he said, his voice breaking. Don't you dare stop fighting. He wrapped her in his coat and carried her back through the storm, the dog circling, barking, leading them home by instinct. The wind howled around them, but he kept walking, inside the house. He laid her near the fire, rubbed her hands, spoke her name over and over until her eyes fluttered open. When she finally breathed steady again, he sank to the floor beside her, his arms still around her, forehead resting against her hair. For a long time, neither moved. The only sound was the wind easing against the windows, the slow, fragile rhythm of two hearts still beating. I think mercy begins where pride ends. That night, Something inside both of them broke, but what remained was truer than before. Outside, the snow fell softer, gentler now, covering their footprints until there was no trace of what had nearly been lost. When Claire woke, the first thing she felt was warmth, the kind that seeps through bone, patient and steady. For a long moment, she didn't know where she was. Then the sound of crackling wood reached her, and she saw the firelight dancing on the ceiling. The room was dim. A quilt covered her up to the chin. Her throat was dry, her hands heavy. Outside, snow pressed against the windows, the world buried in white. She tried to move and winced. Her body ached, as though it had been torn apart and pieced back together. Then she saw him. Adam sat in the chair beside the hearth, coat off, shirt torn at the shoulder. His hand was bandaged, and a faint trace of dried blood stained the edge of the cloth. He was half asleep, chin lowered to his chest. Scout lay near the door, tail thumping softly when Claire stirred. She tried to speak, but the words came out rough. Adam. He opened his eyes, the look on his face relief first, then something quieter, like disbelief cut straight through her. "You're awake," he said, his voice hoarse. How long?" "Since last night." He poured water from the kettle into a tin cup and brought it to her lips. She drank slowly, the metal cool against her mouth. He sat back down, watching her. The firelight caught the line of his jaw, the tiredness in his eyes. "You shouldn't have come after me," she said softly. "Should have let you freeze. I wasn't worth the risk." He looked at her for a long time before answering. "That's not your choice to make." Silence stretched between them, filled with the slow pop of the fire. She turned her face away, unable to meet his eyes. "I didn't mean for any of it to happen," she said finally. "Not the letter, not the lies. I know. That stopped her. You." "No," he nodded. "I've been angry before. Claire, I know what it looks like when someone's sorry." She felt tears rising, but she blinked them back. "You should hate me." "I tried," he said simply. The truth of it settled deep, quiet as snow falling outside. After a long while, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. His voice was low, almost gentle. "You keep running from pain, from the city, from your mother, from me." She didn't answer. He continued, "It's not the running that'll kill you. It's the stopping and realizing no one's chasing." Her throat tightened. He looked into the fire, the light flickering across his face. "Stop running. Claire." The words found her like a hand reaching through the dark. She broke then, not loud, not desperate, just a quiet sob that escaped before she could stop it, the kind that carries everything a person's been holding too long. He didn't move closer, not yet. He just let her cry. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. "I thought if I left first, no one could leave me." He turned toward her, eyes soft. "And how's that worked out?" She gave a shaky laugh through her tears. "Poorly." He reached out then, taking her hand. His palm was rough, warm. "You don't have to earn a place here," he said. "You already have one." She looked up, and in his eyes she saw no anger, only weariness, and something deeper than forgiveness. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a small box, worn at the corners. Inside was a ring, simple silver, set with a pale sapphire framed by 2 pearls. "It was my mother's," he said. "She wore it till the day she died. Said it meant no winter lasted forever." Her breath caught. "Adam, I marry me," he said quietly. "For real this time." No letters, no bargains. Just you and me." She stared at him, tears blurring her vision. "After everything I've done," he shook his head. "We've both done things, but I'm tired of ghosts. I want something living." For a moment, the world outside disappeared, the storm, the past, all of it. There was only the fire and the sound of her heartbeat. She nodded. "Yes." He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as though it had been waiting. They sat there for a long while, hands still clasped, the firelight soft on their faces. "Finally," she whispered. "No more secrets, no more running," he said. "Outside." The wind began to ease. The snow slowed, turning to faint, drifting flakes. I remember that night how the house seemed smaller, yet warmer somehow. Two souls, both bruised by pride and fear, choosing to stay instead of flee. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was honest. And honesty, out here, is the rarest kind of love. Scout stretched by the door, sighing deeply, as if even he understood. Adam leaned back in his chair, his arm resting lightly along the edge of hers. She turned her head, watching the flames. The ring caught the light, glinting once blue and white, like frost under dawn. Neither of them spoke again. They didn't need to. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was alive, breathing with the fragile peace of people who had stopped running from themselves. Outside, the land slept under snow, and for the first time in months, the fire burned not out of survival, but comfort. The cold that year was the kind that crept into the bones of the earth and stayed. The valley lay hushed beneath white and wind. Days passed in a hush of gray light and wood smoke. Inside the ranch house, the fire burned day and night. At first, Adam only coughed. He waved it off as nothing a chill from riding out too long to mend the fence line. But by the second evening, the fever had taken hold. His skin burned hot to the touch, his breath rough and shallow. Claire sat beside him, dampening cloths in cool water, pressing them to his forehead. He tried to rise once, muttering something about tending the horses, but his strength failed him halfway through the sentence. "Lie still," she said softly, guiding him back. "I'm fine," he rasped. "No," she whispered. "Not this time. Outside." The snow fell again, thick and endless. The house seemed smaller, surrounded by the storm. Scout paced near the door, restless, as though he, too, understood the gravity of it. Claire searched through the cabinet, the small collection of herbs she'd gathered over months-dried willow bark, sage, and the root Mrs. Callahan from town had once called mountain gold. She brewed them into a bitter tea, praying it would do more good than harm. When she held the cup to his lips, his eyes flickered open, unfocused. He drank obediently, trusting her even in delirium. Hours passed like days. The fever climbed higher. His breath came in ragged gasps, his shirt damp with sweat. She changed the sheets twice, kept the fire low so the room wouldn't stifle him, and she prayed, not the way her mother had taught her, all polished words and recitations, but in broken whispers, half to God, half to the man she couldn't lose. "Please," she said once, her voice cracking, "not him, not now." In the deep of night, when the wind howled against the windows and the lamps trembled, he stirred suddenly, eyes half open. "Adam," she breathed, leaning close. His lips moved, barely forming sound. "I love you, Claire." For a moment, she thought she'd imagined it. But then his fingers twitched, searching for hers. She caught his hand, pressed it to her cheek, and let herself cry quietly, so he wouldn't hear. I think that's the moment she stopped being afraid of love. Because fear can't live where tenderness demands everything of you. She stayed with him through the night, every hour. She changed the cloth, brewed fresh tea, and fed the fire until her hands blistered from the heat. The fever rose and fell like tides. Once, she thought he'd stopped breathing and nearly screamed his name. Then his chest lifted again, shallow but steady, toward dawn. The wind began to fade. The snow slowed, then stopped. When the first light broke through the window, pale and thin, she was still sitting beside him, her head resting on the edge of the bed, his hand locked in hers. The fever had broken. His skin was cool now, his breathing even. When his eyes opened, they were clearer than they had been in days. He blinked, confused, looking around the room before his gaze settled on her. "Claire." She sat up too fast, dizzy with relief. "You're awake." He tried to smile, but it came weakly. "Guess I gave you a scare." She laughed, a shaky, tearful sound. "A scare." "You nearly—" She couldn't finish. He lifted a hand, brushed her hair from her face. His fingers trembled. "You didn't give up." "I couldn't." He studied her a long moment, his eyes soft with something beyond gratitude, something sacred. "You should have slept." "I couldn't do that either." He smiled then, faint but real. "You're stubborn." "So are you," she said, gripping his hand tighter. They sat in silence, the kind that speaks more than words. Outside, sunlight glinted faintly off the snowdrifts, throwing long shadows through the frosted glass. Scout barked once from the yard, as if to announce that the worst was over. Claire leaned close, pressing her forehead to Adam's. "Don't scare me like that again. I'll do my best." She gave a small laugh, though her eyes shone. "You always say that, because it's true." They stayed that way for a long while, the fire crackling, the world still. She felt his heartbeat under her palm, slow and sure, and something deep in her, something that had been tight and frightened for so long, finally eased. I remember how she described it years later. "It wasn't a miracle," she said, "just mercy, and mercy, out here, feels like sunrise after too many nights of snow." By afternoon, he was strong enough to sit up. She fed him broth and watched him eat, smiling when he complained about the taste. That evening, as the sun sank and painted the valley gold, she took his hand again. "I love you too," she said simply. He looked at her, eyes steady. "I know. It wasn't pride. It was peace, the kind that comes when two people have seen each other at their weakest and stayed anyway." Outside, the last snow of winter began to melt. Water trickled from the eaves, soft as breath. The mountains shone blue and clean under the waning light, and inside, by the fire, a man who had once lived for survival and a woman who had once lived for escape found the stillness they'd been chasing all along. They didn't need to speak vows. The silence between them was the promise. When the thaw came, it came suddenly. One morning, the icicles began to drip from the eaves, slow at first, then steady. By afternoon, water ran in little rivers through the pastures, carrying the memory of winter away. For weeks, the valley had been gray and still. Now, color returned: pale grass pushing through mud, the smell of earth, the distant laughter of children running through the main street of Silver Creek. It was on one such morning that Adam hitched the wagon and said simply, "It's time." Claire looked up from the table where she was sewing the hem of her dress. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "The Reverend said the snow's gone enough for an outdoor service." She smiled, faintly nervous. An outdoor wedding in Wyoming. I suppose that's something new. Everything about us is, he said. She went quiet, her fingers resting on the cloth. The dress was simple white cotton. Nothing more, but the way she touched it made it seem precious. She had no jewels, no lace veil from Fifth Avenue, only a sprig of prairie wildflowers she'd dried and saved since autumn. Scout sat by the door, watching them both, tail sweeping the floor. When the day arrived, the whole town turned out. The people of Silver Creek weren't the kind to miss a celebration. After a winter like that one, they needed something bright. The wedding took place in the open field behind the church, where the ground was still soft from melting snow. Someone had strung wildflowers along the rail fence. The women brought pies and coffee. The men straightened their hats, and the children whispered about the dog carrying the rings. Claire stood near the edge of the clearing, her dress catching the light. She looked different now, not the frightened woman who had stepped off the train months before, but someone quieter, steadier. Adam waited beneath the bare branches of an old cottonwood. His suit was borrowed, his boots polished clean. He turned when she approached, and something in his face softened the same quiet awe he had felt the first time he saw her, stepping into the snow. The Reverend cleared his throat and lifted his Bible. The wind moved gently through the field, stirring the scent of pine and earth. Scout trotted forward, a small ribbon tied around his neck. 2 rings hung from it, one silver, one gold. Laughter rippled through the crowd. When the Reverend began to speak, the noise faded. Marriage, he said, is not built on grand promises, but small mercies, the daily kind, that keep a house warm through the hardest seasons. Adam took the silver ring first. It was his mother's, the sapphire and pearls catching the sunlight. He turned to Claire. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes were steady. He said softly, "I give you this ring as a promise, not that life will be easy, but that I'll face every storm with you." She smiled, tears bright in her eyes. "And I give you this one," she whispered, slipping the gold band onto his finger. "For every morning will still choose to stay." The Reverend closed his book. Then, by the grace given to me and witnessed by this town, I pronounce you husband and wife. And when Adam leaned forward to kiss her, the church bell rang one slow, deep note, followed by another, until the sound rolled across the valley. The people cheered, hats went into the air, hands clapped, laughter carried on the wind. Claire turned her face into Adam's shoulder, laughing through tears. "I never thought the world could sound like this," she said. He rested his hand against her back. "Sounds a lot like home to me." They walked down the field together, Scout bounding ahead. Someone began to play a fiddle, an old tune, rough and cheerful, and the crowd followed them toward the long tables set with food and coffee. Children ran between the adults, chasing each other through puddles. The men told stories, the women passed plates, and all of it, the noise, the warmth, the life felt like a benediction. As dusk settled, lanterns were lit along the fence, glowing like small suns in the fading light. The air smelled of bread and pine and melting snow. Adam stood with his arm around Claire, watching the horizon. "You know," he said quietly, "there was a time I didn't think I'd ever belong anywhere again." She leaned against him, and now he looked out at the crowd people he'd once called strangers, and then back at her. "Now I can't imagine being anywhere else." Later that night, as the music softened and the crowd began to fade, Claire found herself alone near the cottonwood tree. The moon had risen, silvering the edges of the field. She looked down at her ring. the sapphire glinting faintly, and thought of how far she'd come from the girl who'd left New York with tears freezing on her cheeks. She felt a hand slip into hers. Adam stood beside her, quiet as always. "What are you thinking?" he asked. She smiled. "Just that, maybe. Maybe your mother was right. No winter lasts forever." He squeezed her hand gently. "We made it through ours." They stayed there until the last lantern burned low. The church bell silent again. The town gone to sleep. I suppose love, in the end, isn't about beginning over. It's about staying long enough to see the season change. The next morning, the snow had melted from the valley floor. The river ran full and bright. A new wind moved through the pines, carrying the smell of spring. And on the porch of Cole Ranch, 2 wedding rings glimmered in the sunlight, proof that even here, in the rough country of the heart, mercy could take root. By the time the first frost silvered the valley, the Cole Ranch had found its rhythm again. Mornings began with the cry of the rooster, the smell of coffee on the stove, and Adam's boots crossing the porch at dawn. Claire moved slower these days. Her belly had begun to round, the quiet promise of new life resting beneath her heart. She sewed baby clothes in the late afternoon light, humming softly to the sound of wind against the windows. Everything felt still, held in that calm before winter. Then, one morning, a sound broke it, the sharp crack of wheels on frozen ground. Adam stepped out from the barn and saw a carriage climbing the hill, its black paint gleaming like oil under the pale sun. No carriage like that had ever come this far west. When it stopped in front of the porch, the door opened, and a woman stepped down. Evelyn Beaumont had not changed as much as time should have made her. The years had sharpened her beauty into severity. Her fur collar, her gloved hands, her perfect stillness, they didn't belong to this landscape. Dust clung to her boots, and she seemed offended by the very air. Claire came to the doorway, one hand resting against her side. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The years between them, years of silence, betrayal, and pride hung heavy in the space between breaths. Evelyn's voice, when it came, was calm and cold. "So it's true. You're here." Claire nodded. "I am." Her mother's eyes flicked to Adam, who stood beside her now. He was quiet, head in hand, his presence solid as the ground beneath them. "This is the man you married," Evelyn said. "A farmer in the wilderness, a rancher," Adam said evenly. Evelyn ignored him. "You've brought shame on your name, Claire, but it's not too late to come home. We can say it was a misunderstanding. You'll be cared for, respected." "I am respected," Claire interrupted softly. Her mother blinked, as if she hadn't heard correctly. "You can't mean here," Claire met her gaze. "Here is home. Mother?" For a moment, the older woman's composure faltered. "You think this life is enough mud and smoke and animals." Adam stepped forward then, his voice quiet but unshakable. "Mrs. Beaumont, with all due respect, she's not a child. You don't get to decide where she belongs." Evelyn turned to him sharply. "And who are you to speak for her?" He met her eyes. "Her husband." It was then that she noticed Claire's figure, how her daughter's hand pressed gently against her rounded stomach, how her breath came with a softness new to her for the first time. Evelyn's voice broke. "You're with child." Claire nodded. Something flickered in the older woman's face. Shock first, then disbelief, then something far harder to name. She took one unsteady step forward. "Claire." "My God!" But Claire did not move. "It's a girl," she said quietly. "We already know." The silence that followed was not cruel, just heavy, the kind that holds everything unsaid. Evelyn's eyes glistened, though her voice stayed crisp. "You'll raise her out here, in the dirt, in the light," Claire answered, "with kindness, with truth." Her mother looked away, her gloved hand tightening around the carriage rail. I think that was the moment Evelyn Beaumont realized she had already lost the battle, not to her daughter, but to the life she herself had never been brave enough to choose. "Then there's nothing more for me to say," Evelyn murmured. "I'll send word to New York that you're... well..." Claire's voice softened. "You can stay a few days. There's a spare room." Evelyn hesitated, then shook her head. "No, I wouldn't belong." Adam stepped aside as she turned to go, but before she climbed into the carriage, she paused and looked back. "I thought I was doing what was best for you," she said quietly. "Maybe I was only protecting myself." Then she was gone, the carriage rolling away down the long road, its wheels cutting narrow paths through frost. That night, the wind rose again. The first snow came early. Claire went into labor before dawn. The hours blurred together, firelight, water boiling on the stove, the midwife's calm voice. Adam stayed near her side, his large hand wrapped around hers. Every time the pain surged, she gripped him tighter. "You're all right," he whispered. "I've got you." She cried out once, and he felt the helpless terror of every man who's ever watched love suffer for the sake of something new. When the cry of the baby filled the room, he nearly collapsed from relief. The midwife smiled, holding the tiny bundle up for them to see. "A girl," she said softly. "Strong lungs. This one." Claire was pale but smiling, tears running down her cheeks. "Hope," she whispered. "Her name is Hope." Adam looked at his wife, then at the child, and something inside him, something that had always been guarded, braced against loss, finally eased. He took the baby in his arms, awed by her smallness, her heat, the miracle of her. Outside, the storm passed. Dawn broke over the mountains, faint pink lights spilling across the snow. Claire reached for his hand. "We did it," she said, voice barely above a whisper. He sat beside her, the baby cradled between them. "We did." I was told later that the letter came a week afterward, a short one, written in Evelyn Beaumont's careful hand. "If there is a chance," it read, "perhaps I might see her someday. Tell her grandmother prays for her health. No apology, no request for forgiveness, just a line of hope, and in this family, that was enough." By spring, the ranch was alive again with the sound of new life. Scouts slept near the porch, always within sight of the cradle. Adam worked the fields with a steadier heart, and Claire sang to her daughter in the evenings old songs from the city she had once wanted to forget. Sometimes, when the wind came down from the hills, carrying the faint echo of church bells from town, Claire would stand by the window, watching the valley stretch out before her, and she would think not of what she had lost, but of what had begun at last. The valley had changed. Fences ran farther now, tracing lines across the rolling fields where once there had only been open range. The barn stood rebuilt, larger, red against the gold of dawn. A new telegraph wire hummed faintly along the road to Silver Creek. Time had come quietly, not as a thief, but as a guest who stayed. On the porch of the house, Claire sat at a small writing desk by the window. Her hair had turned silver at the temples, though her hands were still graceful, steady as ever. A pot of wildflowers bloomed beside her papers, the same kind she'd worn in her hair the day she married Adam. She dipped her pen and began to write. "My dear Eleanor," the letter began. I don't know if this will ever reach you in the city, or if the old address still stands. But sometimes, words have to find their way back to where they started, even if no one is there to read them. Outside, laughter echoed from the yard. Hope, now 17, was brushing down one of the colts. Her long braids swayed as she moved, sunlight glinting through it. Adam stood nearby, leaning on the fence, his hair grayer now, but his shoulders still strong. Claire smiled faintly, pausing her writing. You asked me, years ago, if I regretted the wager. I think about that often. She wrote, how my mother turned a cruel amusement into a destiny I never could have chosen for myself. Perhaps that is how Providence works, using even pride to lead us toward grace. Scout lay near the porch, old now, his muzzle white. He slept deeply these days, waking only when Hope called his name. The sun rose higher. The field shimmered with new grass, and from the barn came the soft sound of doves. Adam built the new barn last spring, Claire continued, and Hope says she wants to learn carpentry next. She has his eyes, and something of his stillness too. I see in her the strength of this land, the patience to wait for things to grow. She stopped for a moment, looking out across the valley. The same mountains still stood where they had always stood. The same creek wound through the fields, silver under the light. When I first came here, she wrote, I thought the West was punishment, empty, endless, merciless. But now I know it was mercy in disguise. It stripped away what didn't matter, left only what endures work, faith, and the simple truth of a hand held through hardship. Adam came to the doorway then, his hat in hand, writing to someone. She looked up and smiled, just finishing a story. He nodded, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Make sure it ends well. It does, she said. Better than I ever dreamed. He leaned down and kissed her forehead before heading back to the pasture. Claire watched him go, her heart catching in that small, familiar ache, the kind that comes not from pain, but from gratitude too large to hold. She turned back to the letter. We were a joke once. Eleanor, a mail-order bride and a rancher, born of a bet. People laughed, said it would never last. But the joke became a life. We built this place with our hands, and somehow love took root between the cracks. The pen hesitated, then she added, we were a joke once. Now we're a family. Outside, Hope was waving toward the porch. Mama, supper's ready soon. Coming at cone. Dear, Claire called back, her voice warm. She sealed the letter, though she knew she might never send it. Some things were meant to be said only once, for the sake of the saying. As evening fell, the family gathered outside for supper. The air smelled of fresh bread and pine. Scout dozed by the steps, the last light brushing over his fur like gold dust. Hope talked excitedly about a trip to town, her plans to bring books for the small school she wanted to start near the creek. Adam listened, smiling in that quiet way of his. Claire reached across the table, took his hand. His fingers were rough, the same as they had been all those years ago, and yet the touch still startled her with its gentleness. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, and there they were, 3 silhouettes against the fading light, a man, a woman, and the daughter who bore both their names in her laughter. I was there once, years later, when the snow began to melt and the sound of the creek returned. They stood together in the open field, looking toward Silver Creek, where the bell tower caught the light. Adam lifted Hope onto his shoulders, and Claire laughed, her scarf blowing in the wind. The years had settled around them, but they wore them lightly like a coat they had earned through every storm. The world keeps its secrets, but I think that's how peace comes, to those who wait for it. The letter, as far as anyone knows, was never mailed. It was found years later in the drawer beside her desk, folded neatly, her handwriting steady to the last line. Still happy, still grateful. Thank you for accompanying me on Claire and Adam's journey, from a cruel bet to the moment they stood together, hand in hand, in the sunset over Silver Creek. Their story is not just about love. It's about kindness, forgiveness, and the belief that even in the most barren places, new life can grow. If you've ever shed a silent tear or smiled at the simple promises made between two ordinary people, then you know why I call this Frontier Hearts. Claire and Adam's world may be more than a century old, but their message remains no matter how far you go, no matter how broken you are. There is always a place and someone waiting for you to return. If you find this story touching your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel to continue with me on other touching journeys. Stories that make us cry in silence but believe in something better. See you in the next story of Frontier Hearts.